So as we discussed yesterday, so I'll repeat from what we did yesterday. This is for you to understand what we are doing. So as part of today's class, so we are going to do module one. So module one is business analysis and stakeholders overview. So that's what up to have we saw yesterday as far as I was giving you the module breakdowns. So here today, in today's class, expect the following. That is more on business analysis introduction. So we'll understand what is business analysis. You can be able to define what is business analysis. Then we can see some career path in business analysis, and then we have what you call the business analysis frameworks and techniques. So we will see. Yesterday I was explaining to you what is a business framework because most of the business analysts or developers uses these frameworks to solve the various business or to analyze the various firms or businesses so as they can provide the right solutions. And I told you that different organizations or different firms, they have different frameworks because the same framework that you're using for Deloitte is not the same that you're using for Equity, KCB, and so on. So each particular organization or firm has a different framework. Then I told you about learning about the software development lifecycle, which is very, very important part of it also. Then we learn about the stakeholders identification. So how do you identify stakeholders to work with, and how do you manage these particular stakeholders after identifying them? Then we have the stakeholders analysis and engagement techniques. How do you analyze these particular stakeholders and how do you engage them to make sure that they are there to stay and to support all the programs or maybe the projects you guys are doing. Then we have the critical analysis of a business analysis. We will see that. Then we have the business mapping process. So we need also to learn about this. Then I told you about this, there as is state and to be state analysis and documentation. So how do you document? So I told you this is more so on the gap analysis. So this is gap analysis. So we'll learn about the gap analysis and then how do you document the two states? Because these are two states, the current state and the future state of a company. Then talk about the requirement overview. So also we'll talk about the requirements and then types of requirements that most uh, businesses or firms require as far as the solutions that you're providing is much concerned. So we'll get into our presentation. Can you see my slides? Please confirm before we proceed. Okay, fine, fine, no problem. So you can see I've put it into presentation mode. So let me know in case you're not seeing. So it's about the business analysis and stakeholders overview. So that is our target today to learn about what is business analysis and stakeholders overview. So that is our main thing in this topic today. So this is what to expect. I've already taken you through the Word document, but I've summarized it in a way that you can be able to remember. So business analysis introductions and career path. So that is one thing. And then we have the business analysis framework, SDLC, stakeholders analysis, and all that you can see on the screen. I don't want to repeat myself and so on. So let's go to the discipline of business analysis. So what is business analysis and what does a business analyst do? And then in these particular sections, also we'll see some best frameworks and techniques you personally, Walter, you can use to analyze the various businesses or maybe the firms that you've been hired to work for. For example, right now, you're working in an organization, but you are learning about business analysis. You want to understand the organization very well in a way that you can come up with the right solutions for these organizations that you're working with currently. Then we'll talk also about the software development life cycle landscapes because we have the various uh, software development life cycles that you can employ or you can use as part of your solution, or you can use them as part of providing a solutions to a certain company. Here we'll talk about some various good uh, software development life cycles like Waterfall, Agile, the V model, the Spiral, and more. Then for the framework is the BABOK, which is the Business Analysis Book of Knowledge. We'll learn about the SWOT analysis. I think you've heard about the SWOT analysis because this is one of the common method that is always there, is there to most companies apply it to analyze the business. So this is about the strength, the weaknesses, and opportunities and threats that exist between within the organizations. Then talk about the PESTLE's methods. We'll see the definitions, political, about economical, social, and so on and so on and so on to analyze a business. So I hope up to that point you're okay. So what is business analysis at large? So how do you define how do you define business analysis? So just think about you being a business analyst. You're someone who just provides solutions to a company. So this is just a practice of enabling change within an organization by defining the needs and recommending solutions that deliver the value to the stakeholders. Remember, at the end of the day, the stakeholders are going to care for the values, the final outputs that they are getting. If this particular product or maybe solution or a system that you personally, Walter, you are building is going to give that company a profit, they don't care about it. It's all about the values. They want to meet their needs, but this will come as a result of a business analyst because they are going to analyze the business, they will see the problem, and then they will sit down with the board members or maybe the team that the company works with. You guys are going to come up with the best solutions. So just think yourself as someone who is a problem solver. You're providing a solution to a company. So that's one of the key things that should uh, be in your mind. So you are just enabling change to an organizations by defining their needs. Yeah. So in short, you're just a problem solver. You're just providing a solution to an organization. Just stick that to your mind. Yeah. So in this case, you can think it in a larger perspective whereby you can talk it as an integral to a successful kind of executions of projects across the various industries. Because within the company, there is what we call project appraisal. You know very well what is a project appraisal. A company has so many projects and they want to know which kind of project is going to give them profit at the end of the day. But how are they going to implement the best projects? It's by having someone who is going to be analyze these particular projects for them to make them understand or to know the profit that they are going to get from that particular or the value propositions the project is going to bring for them. That's why we use things like uh, we have, if we go into mathematics, we use things like net present values, we use things like internal rate of returns, and so on and so on and so on. So there is always a business problem that exists, as you can see on the slide, and then there is the business analyst. So you personally, you are acting as a bridge between the business problem and the valuable solution for the company. So that is your role. If someone asks you, who are you like as a business analyst, just tell them you're the one who stands between the problem that the business faces and the solution and the valuable solutions that the company wants. Yeah. So let's not spend much more time there, but I'm quite sure that you have now understood what is business analysis. It's a process. And then as a business analyst, you stand between the business problem and the valuable solutions that uh, you people are going to implement. So, and in this case, it normally involves things like technology, but not exclusively most of the time. And then you try to apply any kind of organizational change in terms of processes that they operate with, the policy they operate with, the structure, the system. You personally, Walter, you can be hired to go and examine how Deloitte is operating. They have their own processes, but maybe there are some processes, maybe these processes are failing. Maybe there are some changes that need to be made within those processes. There are places that needs to be optimized. So you personally are going to go there, study the process step by step, and you try now to understand it. And from there, instead of this company implementing our whole process, you'll just tell them that we need just to optimize the existing process that we have within the company. So that is all about that. So, and then sometimes we have the policies because most companies have policies, but sometimes the company have implemented some policies which hinders them from making progress and everything. So it means that they need to maybe sit down and reevaluate these kind of policies that they have implemented within the organization. And I'm quite sure since you're working in one of the organizations, definitely that company has a policy that they are operating with. So you personally, as a business analyst, you can sit down reevaluate these kind of policies and see how is it affecting the overall business at large. Yeah. Then we have the structure of the business itself. Sometimes you need to alter those structures a bit so as the processes can go smoothly and the business can get what they want at the end of the day. Because remember here, business is operating with needs. Then we have systems in this case. Also, each company is having a system. They have adopted kind of systems. But you know, as far as systems are concerned, some companies they have defaultive kind of systems, and these systems are very weak. They are very poor. They are kind of outdated analog kind of systems. So these companies has to adopt a new kind of systems that will put them in a cutting edge. Uh, like for example, this era, it's a era of technology. If a company is not adopting the new technology, the new technological systems that we have, the new ecosystems of technology that we have, most of them they will fall behind and they will be uh, it's like only the strongest to survive. You know how we used to talk about that in biology, yeah? So it's all about adoptions and adopting the right systems, the right technology, the right structure, the right policy, and the right processes that is making these companies go ahead. So I hope you've understood that section. Then what does a business analyst actually do? You as a business analyst, what do you do? If I ask you, like you go to an interview and then be asked, what does a business analyst do? One is what we call eliciting requirements. This is all about gathering and documenting what we call stakeholders' needs. And you have to go to the field, you have to gather information, so you have to do some research here and there. Because let's say you want to go to a circle, it's kind of an analog kind of a system. This circle has board of directors, has executives and everyone. Uh, Sorry, did you drop? Okay, so did you get about the business analysis part of it? Okay, but I didn't proceed much. So I was discussing about this part of business analysis. A business analyst, they apply what you call organizational changes. And I told you about organizations having different processes, they have policies, they have structures, they have systems. And I told you about sometimes these processes. These are gaps that exist. That's why you see that in every organizations we have processes gap, technological gap, skill gap, and everything. So you personally, as a business analyst, you need to study these particular uh, items within that organizations. You need to study their processes and see is there any part of the processes that we can be able to alter a bit, we can be able to maybe correct or something. So you need to do that. Also, I was talking about the policies because there are some policies that most organizations are applying. And you'll notice that most of these policies are not, they're the ones that are bringing these organizations down. So you guys need to sit down and try to match these particular policies to the needs of the organizations. And then it will assist you to recommend the best solutions that will be able to deliver value to the stakeholders because it's all about the stakeholders' interest at the end of the day. Are they making profit or not? And then we have structures and then we have systems. Systems, I was talking about companies having a defaultive kind of systems, which uh, what we can call them analog. They have not adopted to the new systems that we have, and we know how technology is at the moment. Every organization needs to adopt the right systems. And systems you can choose to do. Some organizations choose to build a system from scratch. They choose to buy a system. They choose to maybe do a collaborations of other people. They use other people's systems and so on and so on. Yeah. So it's up to you as a business analyst to be able to give about that. So then we have what does a business analyst do? If you go to an interview and then someone asks you, Walter, like, what does a business analyst do? So these are some of the responsibilities that a analyst does. So we have eliciting the requirements. Elicitation is all about gathering the right informations or documenting the stakeholders' needs. What do these stakeholders need? You go and try and get, maybe you can do some research, you can do some interviews, you can interview as many stakeholders as possible to understand what is their need. You can maybe you come and notice that most stakeholders they focus on getting profit and so on and so on. So you'll know that is their end goal, yeah. Then we have documenting solutions. You need to document solutions also. So clear, concise documentations of the proposed solutions. And then there is problem solving. That's why I told you that you are like a problem solver because you're standing between the business problem and the valuable solutions that is to be implemented. So you are a bridge between the two. So in short, in this case, you are a problem solver. Then we have analyzing processes. That's why I've talked about business analyst, learning about the organizational structures, processes, systems, policies, and so on. So there is analyzing the processes, you understanding the current workflow of a company. Then you find the improvement areas. I told you about that. Sometimes you just have to do some a bit of improvement to the existing processes that we have. Then there is what we call facilitating communications. You are liaison between the business users, the IT, and the communications, because I told you about this. There is a time you'll have to communicate your solutions to these particular stakeholders, and most of them are non-technical. And I told you that one of the best skills that you can have as a business analyst is being a very good communicator in what you do. Like you need to have a very good communications because you're the one who understands about all this. Yeah. Then you need to manage these particular stakeholders. And then I've heard very well that you normally work with stakeholders in this case. So you're managing stakeholders. So this is a nutshell of what you do as a business analyst. And so in summary, it's all about identifying business problems and opportunities. Then there is about elaborating and validating the business requirements at large. Then talk about facilitating communication among stakeholders. That is facilitating communication, and then there is supporting the implementations of the solutions. You have to support all that because at the end of the day, that solution has to work for the company and it has to bring value to the stakeholders because at the end of the day, you're safeguarding the interest of stakeholders. So these are some of the responsibilities of of a business analyst. So let's check some a bit of career ladder that you're going to take as a business analyst. So one is the entry level. So here you normally start as a business analyst, learning and applying what you call core business analysis skills in the life project. So here you are just using your first principle knowledge that you've learned from maybe your certifications, you, and maybe some other learnings or other resources. So you normally start from somewhere. The mid-level part of it is being a senior or who we call a lead kind of business analyst. Here in this case, you are leading major projects, yeah? You're monitoring juniors in that case, and then you're owning strategic initiatives. So you'll find yourself leading projects. You're the lead in that team. You guys are developing a product within the organization, so you are the most you are the person who is leading this particular group. So in this case, you are a senior and you are, in short, you are a lead business analyst. So you'll start as a business analyst, you go to a senior, and then the advanced one is normally what we call the architect consultant in this case. In this case, you're more so like a project manager. You are doing more so on a project management, yeah? Like an enterprise level analysis, advisory roles, and then program kind of leadership. But in this case, you are now handling what we call complex responsibilities and more project. Yeah. And then in terms of specializations, where do you specialize as a business analyst? I told you about the data analytics part of it. So you have to have a very good data analytics skills. That will really help you as a business analyst because you can work in an e-commerce kind of firm, and then they have a data of their customers, and then maybe their sale is depreciating, their customer rate is depreciating, and you need to come in. Remember that you need to have a very good time data analytics skills because remember that you have to learn a bit of time series. You can learn about seasonalities and everything cyclical and trends because you need to provide a solution to this company. You need to tell them that at this period of year, this is when the company make losses and everything. You just mark them, and then maybe you have the peak periods when the company is selling at maybe their sales are going high. So you need now to come up with the solutions within this period when the company sales is depreciating or is going down, there is a recession, there is a boom. I think there is that curve that we learned in business called a boom recession, something. So that trough, you have that trough, and then you can explain, tell them from this data I've analyzed, these are the charts, these are the everything. You have the variables, the features that you're using within your data set, and you're telling them from this particular graph, you can see that these are the peaks, the periods that you're making losses. And then you try to dig deeper and provide solutions. What can we do? Our sales, you can tell them the sales have been dropping by 10% each particular month. What can we be able to do to increase these particular sales every month by 20%, 30%, or 40%? So that is it about data analytics. Then talk about the security, the cyber security part of it. Uh, Talk about systems, because talk about systems being vulnerable. Sometimes they can be penetrated. Um, you can be good at this, providing systems with high securities and everything to avoid things like cyber attacks. Because remember, most of the systems in organizations, they have what you call the client data. We have things like data privacy. We need to protect the data of the clients. And nowadays, the law, if you breach data, if there is a data breach from your company, you can highly penalized. Yeah, you know about that, and you can take a chance of that. Learn about systems, how best providing best securities for systems and everything to avoid the cyber attacks and everything. Process improvement. This is quite common. Talks about the processes of the company. How best can you be able to improve them? Talk about the industry domain. You can work in health sectors, uh, talk about finance, because finance is another sector. Talk about the insurance, and then the telecommunication sectors. So these are the areas that you personally, Walter, you can be able to uh, specialize as a business analyst within your period as a business analyst, senior, or architect, or someone who is now doing the project management part of it. I hope you're okay at that part up to now. Are we to, you're getting right? You sing. Okay, okay, okay. Let's go to the next one. So in this one, what are some of the required kind of skills? By the way, let me just go back here. Here, there is sometimes you can start as a junior business analyst. It's not that a must you start as a business analyst. You can start as a junior. So junior is mostly about the entry level positions, which normally focus on learning and supporting the senior business analyst. So you can just be under them and you learn with time. Then now you can progressively go to the business, to the senior business analyst. In this case, now you are experienced kind of a business analyst. Then we have the lead business analyst, by the way, where you can talk about the lead. So which I've already told you. So you can move from senior to lead. And then, by the way, there is also a chance of you being a senior business analyst. No, a business analysis manager. You can be a manager, by the way. And after that, you can go to a higher role like product manager. In this case, you can venture in things like product strategies and things like requirements. So, which is closely related to business analysis. Yeah. So here you are just managing the life cycles of a software product, because there are most organizations that are focusing more on the production part. So just to move on, so these are some of the skills that you need. We need to lay a foundation for you. So here, skills and professional certifications that you can do. Skills that you need to be analytical. That is a must. Critical thinking in this case, problem solving, and a data analysis kind of skills. So make sure at least you are building your data analysis skills. I've told you about that. Then be a very good communicator. That is all about communications. Both we have verbal, written, and active kind of listening, because remember that at the end of the day, if you present your solutions to the stakeholders, remember that it will spark a conversations between you and the stakeholders, and you'll have to listen to them, because at the end of the day, despite the fact that you know how to build that system on your own, at the end of the day you have to put their input matters more than yours. Yours is just directions and everything. Yeah. Then have a good interpersonal skills, building relationships with them, and how to collaborate with various teams, because part of being a business analyst is a business developer or a business analyst is all about collaborating with people, building relationships, and so on. Talk about the domain knowledge. You have to understand the industry or business. You can't tell me, Walter, you are a business analyst, and you don't understand the domain, the the entire how the industry operates and everything. So you need to have that kind of knowledge of how the industry or the business area understands. So as you can call yourself a business analyst. So you see that is kind of knowledge that you need to have. So in this case, you can have credentials that you can be able to do like ECBA, which is an entry certificate in business analysis, which is the same as this what you're doing right now. Then we also have certifications of capabilities in business analysis, where it's more so on the experienced business analyst. So we have the IABA body that handles that. Then we have the CBAP, which is the Certified Business Professional, highly experienced kind of business analysis also. So these are some of this we have just listed for you so that you see some of the certifications that you need to do. Don't worry, I will share the deck with you on the recording at the end of the class. Now let's get deeper into business analysis frameworks. So what are frameworks? I told you about this. So this, if you hear anything like a framework, it outlines the key tasks, techniques, and competencies of a business analysis. So it's just like a guideline, not a rigid set of rules. Yeah? Talk about, it's like a tool, yeah, that you use. It shows the key task that you need to do, techniques and competencies of a business analysis. So one of them, we have the various kind of frameworks like the business book of knowledge, which is called the BABOK. So this is one of the it's one of the best frameworks that you can use. So in this case, one is that it is globally recognized, and then it defines the knowledge areas, tasks, and competencies and business techniques that you need to have. Then there is the basis of the IIBA certifications. So if you want to learn about that, it's it's a whole entire book for business analysis that you can learn. Then we have the Agile methodologies. More so we focus on the Scrum and the Kanban. We'll learn about that, don't worry. Then here we are focusing about what you call iterative development, collaborations, and frequent feedback. So agility, we told you, it's all about flexibility, collaboration, and feedback that you get at the end of the day. Then it work centers on user stories and backlog refinements. Then today's dominant kind of delivery context. That's why you see that in project management, you need to learn about the agility, the agile methodologies, because it's one of the best methods or skills that you can have. Maybe if you want to, you personally, you want to become a product manager, you need to have some agile methodologies and knowledge and everything, which we will cover in module 4, which I've already stated there. So these are just some of the frameworks, the BABOK, the agile methodologies, and uh, that you can be able to use. So business analysis frameworks. So don't confuse it with. So we have the BABOK, the Business Book of Knowledge. Another one is we can have the BCSC, Business Analysis Framework. But this is mostly for UK. Is a UK kind of specific frameworks, which normally outlines the business competencies and techniques. Yeah, yeah. So best techniques, so business analysis technique toolkit that you can use to analyze a business, because here we are talking about uh, analyzing a business. So these are the tools that you can use. One of them is SWOT analysis. So here, S stands for strength, W stands for weakness, and then O stands for opportunities, and then T stands for threats. But you have to divide them into external and internal. So for the internal, we normally focus with what are some of the strengths of the company. Then weaknesses, those are internal. Then opportunities, these are external factors. And then threats is also external sometimes. So they're normally divided by two, internal and external. So you can use that to analyze a business and understand it better through its strength, weaknesses, opportunities that they have. So opportunities, these are things or maybe projects or other collaborations that can come that can assist the company to grow. Talk about the PESTLE. So PESTLE is also another skill, that's a technique that we use to analyze a business. It's about political, so you analyze, you see how the political affect the business, economic, social, technology, legal, environment context. So these are some of the things that comes handy when you talk about the business analysis techniques. So talk about the gap analysis. So it's the distance between the current state of a company and the future state of a company. You go to you go to a telecommunication company or maybe something like what can we talk about? Uh, uh, it's called what? Talk about a company which is maybe it's a company which is trying to invest, or how can they have, or where can they be in the next 5 years. So you personally, you go and do what you go gap analysis. You analyze the current state of the company. What is the state of this company? How are they at the moment? Do they have a strong technological systems? Do they have good structures? Do they have best policies? Do they have the best processes that they can use? If it is a no, you now start to future you start to, like, it's like doing a projection. A projection, how do you do projection? You're using the past historical data to now project future, you see. So in that case, you have to analyze the present state of the company and then future, that, like, try to come up with ways you want to see this company in the next 10 years being the best uh, company in technology. Maybe they are dealing with tech and everything, something of this sort. Then we have the process mapping, visual representing workflows to understand and improve them. So this is about studying the process of the company, understanding how they are. In case there is an area for improvement, you just suggest and everything. Then we have the use cases. So this is how users interact with the system to achieve what we call a specific goal. Because if you develop a solution, you develop a solution for a company, remember that that company will have customers or people will be consuming that product. So we'll have these use cases in between. Then we have a user story. So in this case, as a user, I want this and this to benefit. For example, let me give you a perfect example of a user story. For example, you personally, you can go to a Jumia app. Jumia has so many products, but you personally, you as a user, you can say, you as a customer, I want to search products by maybe first letter or maybe category, so that I can be able to maybe get the product faster. It's the same way with an Uber app, because Uber has you want to track the driver. You want, some people normally say that they want to see how the driver is moving and everything. That is a tracking system. So there is someone who once gave that feedback. They said, as a customer, I want to track I want to see the rider in real time, so that I can be able to track them and see how far they are or how much time they will take to reach the destination that I am. So that is a user story. You say that Walter, I want to uh, be able to search product within that particular app using maybe keywords, maybe first word, maybe the second letters, maybe if it is a shoe, you don't have to type the whole word. You have to just type SH and it will bring whatever you want. So that is like an example of a user story. Then if you talk about the requirement workshops, in this case, you are trying to facilitate, it is normally facilitated with stakeholder sessions to gather and validate the requirement. Then there is prototyping. I know you understand what is prototyping. This is what normally models that demonstrate the functionality and gather feedback. Remember, before you build the actual system or the actual product itself, you have to come up with a prototype. What is the advantages of building a prototype as a developer or someone who is coming up with a solution? To avoid making losses, because sometimes you can spend a lot of money building a model or a system, then at the end of the day, you deploy it to the market and no one consume it or no one is using that product. So you see, as a company, you guys will be able to make a very huge loss. Then we have data analysis. You see how data analysis is hunting you, yeah? So here you're going to talk about trends, patterns, insight that inform the business operations, or you just tell them where they'll be able to make high sales. Which periods, which peak periods are these? You're telling them it is January or maybe February, March, December, or maybe this year, the whole of this year, they'll be able to make profit. So you see, your data analysis skills should be a top notch and you should be able to understand it very, very, very well. I hope up to that point we are together. Please confirm. Okay, great. Okay, have you ever done a bit of software development? Like have you ever indulged yourself into developing something like a system, like a product, anything, like developing something using typing, not typing, maybe coding, not specifically coding, but developing a model, like something like a model, a prototype or something. Hmm? Oh, so but oh, okay. Hmm. Oh, you build so oh, that is amazing. That's very good. That's good. That's good. I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, so okay, but that's very good. I just wanted to understand so that at least you don't float in this, but I'm seeing that you have a very good background indeed. So you'll notice that software development is very essential. You need to understand that it is very essential for business analysts to understand as they dictate how projects are planned. So one thing, the reason why you're studying the software development life cycle is to dictate how projects are normally planned, because before project is executed or everything takes or maybe it's being piloted, so they normally plan it, execute, and then they deliver at the end of the day. Yeah. So in this case, it's just a structured approach to planning, creating, testing, and deploying software systems. So different model exists, each with strength and weakness. So you'll notice that under that we'll see the various types of models, their weaknesses and strength, and when can you be able to use a certain kind of model and not another one. So here we normally have some series of stages that we do. Uh, so that's so normally uh, we normally like start from requirement, design, development, then development, testing, deployment. Okay, just a minute. Okay, so you understand about okay, requirements, design, and that. Okay, so if you understand about requirements, these are things that you need for uh, to make your project complete, or maybe a product or a system. Remember that. Then you normally do the design part of it. You design, and then after designing, you go to the development part of it. Development can be maybe coding and anything you can do about it to make sure that you come up with a project. Uh, then there is about testing to make sure that you are doing like whatever you've built is working, because you can't sell people a solution that is not working. So you have to test it. You can maybe deploy it to few customers or a few people for free and everything they can test, and then from there they can be able to give you feedback. Then if it works perfectly, you can be able now to do what you call deployment part of it. You are now deploying it for ready for market and consumptions and everything. Then so, as a business analyst, why must you understand the software development life cycle? You have to. You don't have a shortcut, or you don't have like things like timings and depth of the requirements. Work changes completely between models and everything. So here you'll notice that you need to understand because there are some timing and depths of the requirements. Work changes completely between the models. So you need to understand because you'll see how requirements varies between each particular models and each particular uh, software development lifecycle. Then Waterfront loads the business analyst efforts. Agile spread it across every sprint. So we'll see about that. Then choosing or adapting to the wrong model is a leading cause of a project failure because if you don't know which kind of model is sufficient for a particular uh, problem, you'll give out like the project entirely will be a loss to the company, and at the end of the day you won't be able to provide the right solution for for the company. So let's start with the first one. The first one is the waterfall. Let's talk about the first one. So the first one is the waterfall. So we have the first one as the waterfall. So these are kind of a sequential kind of approach where each particular phase must be completed before the next one begins. So you see here begin you must complete the first step before you go to the second step. But we will see there is a difference between that with other models. For example, talk about the incremental kind of models. You'll notice that each particular stage or phase, the product can function. The MVP. I know you know about the MVP, right? You know about the MVPs. Yeah, exactly. So we have that. So you'll notice that sometimes maybe another part of product can be able to work, or part of that particular system that you've built can function separately without the other ones. And then later on, you can merge them as one to form the entire system. Yeah. So we'll see about that. There is what we call a spiral. So you'll notice that they work in that way. So it's a kind of a linear sequential flow. So you see it is linear and sequential. So it follows a certain structure. So here is you have the requirements, the design, and then there is the development stage, then there is the testing stage, and then the deployment stage. So you see in this case, each particular stage has to rely on the other one. Like you can't design without the requirements. You can't develop without the design. You can't test without completing the development part of it. So you see, it's a kind of a linear, sequential, kind of a software development method. So you notice that each phase completes before the next one begins. So that is it. There is nothing big about it. So each particular stage follows another one like that. So it's best when requirements are well defined, stable, and unlikely to change. So that is when you can apply the waterfall. Then, for example, you as a business analyst role, so I've stated there, uh, front-loaded kind of detailed requirements are elicited. So you're gathering, and then you document, and then you signed off upfront before any code is written. Then talk about the real world example. For example, just making a very simple calculator. So this is a perfect example. Requirements are crystal clear, so you know what you need for the calculator. Things like you're focusing more on building something is basic arithmetic and won't change as with time and so on. So the team defines all the features, designs the user interface. We will see more. If you talk about systems, mostly we will talk about the user interface. Then codes, test, and releases. So strictly in sequence. But if a user requests a scientific mode late in the project, it will be very difficult and costly to add. Because if you move forward, it's like that. There is no going back. It's not that very flexible, and you can't do any other change between that. Then we have the agile model, which is more so you'll hear people calling it the Scrum. So you notice for this, it's a kind of an iterative and incremental approach where you'll notice that requirements and solutions evolve through what we call collaborations. Yeah. So it is iterative, incremental development in short cycles. So we call it sprints. That's why in companies you will hear that they will tell you that we are doing sprint one, we are in sprint two, we are in sprint three, and so on. So, and then it emphasizes what we call flexibility. That is the best part of it. There is collaborations and there is frequent feedbacks in between the processes or from each particular sprints that you guys are developing. Then it is ideal for large complex projects. So if you're doing a very complex project, you need to employ the agile model or the Scrum part of it. Yeah. So you as a business analyst, uh, you collaborate with the team in every sprint. So writing and refining user stories. So here you're grooming the backlog of that product or maybe the systems or the project itself while you try to validate the increments part of it. An example is collaborating platforms, e.g. Slack and Teams. I hope you've interacted with Teams and you see how seamless it is and very good, and also Slack. So these are perfect examples of agile or model. So start with an MVP, which is a minimum viable product, basic messaging and profiles. So work in 2 week sprints, something like that, each delivering a work increment, a working kind of increment. So you'll notice that one sprint file sharing, another video calls. So user feedback after every sprint reshapes the plan. So flexibility is the point here. So you're focusing on this flexibility, collaborations, and what we call frequent feedbacks, which now helps to reshape the entire system of the product and everything. So here, talk about the software models. So we normally start with the waterfall. I know you know about other models like RAD models, the spiral, the V model, the incremental model, the agile model, the iterative models, the Bing Bang models. So we normally have a lot of models that goes around here. Then we have the V model. So this is another type of model that we have within the software development lifecycle. But one thing you have to notice about the V model is that this is an extension of a waterfall model, yeah, because it tries to focus on what we call verification and validation. So if you hear your project or maybe your system is focusing more on verification and validation, that is a V-shaped model, or that is a V-shaped software development lifecycle that you guys are applying. For example, I can give you a perfect example of a business analyst who tries to ensure that each particular development stage has what we call a corresponding testing activities. For example, these testing activities normally confirms the requirements that are met at each particular level of the project. Yeah. For example, if you're building a user interface, a very good interactive user interface, remember that this interface has to be very interactive in a way that the user they don't find it difficult to interact with it. They can be able to maneuver around, navigate around. For example, let's talk about web services or maybe something like a website. You're building a website. You make sure that this particular website is fitting within the, what do we call, the various tablets or technological things that we have, like phones, laptop, iPads, and so on and so on. So someone can be able to interact with it very well. It can fit within the screen. It can load under 3 seconds and everything. We will see all that in the business documents, the BRDs, the FRDs, and so on. But I'm just trying to give you that example so that you get it. So in this case, we normally have testing activities that are done to confirm that the requirements are met at each particular levels of the projections. So if we say maybe sprint one is about user interface, we are making a login sections. We want you to log in using your name and the company's credentials that you have. Maybe it is being fetched from the company's database. Let it say sometimes companies don't have your database. They're using third-party databases. So they will have to use some APIs. You know about APIs, the application programming interfaces. They can link between the two, and then the problem is that it doesn't update in the real time. So that is it about that. So here we are focusing more on verifications and validations. I hope you've gotten that clear. Then the business, you as a business analyst, what is your role in this case? So here is you heavily involved in testing the planning and validating. So that is your key thing. That is acceptance criteria are defined alongside what we call requirements before developing begins. We say that these particular systems has to you can be able to generate 10 report, maybe 1,000 reports per minute, maybe when it comes to that sections of generating those reports, you people has to validate and verify that this particular system has to generate 1,000 transactions within 1 minute. If it does, that's okay. If it does not, you people go back to building the system again and doing some minor corrections, which is preventing the system from doing that. You see, this is, for example, we have an example of an insulin pump whereby safety is paramount. That's the key thing. So testing pairs with what you call the every stage. So systems architect. So you're focusing on the system architect, acceptance testings, design, which is the same as the integrations part of it. You do some testing, coding, unit testing, and everything to make sure that each particular unit or a module of the system is functioning properly. That's why you're doing the system architecture part of it. So acceptance testing. So you do see like if the customer is going to accept that structure, you know how an architecture look like of a system. So you have to develop it in advance. Then we have another good model, which is called the incremental model. So for the incremental model, this is another one. So this one, you're breaking the system into smaller manageable modules, which are normally called the increments. So each one of them is normally developed, tested, and deployed independently. So in this case, you'll notice that each particular module can operate independently. Like it doesn't rely on another kind of, in each model, it doesn't rely on another module. So it works independently. Yeah. So working functionality is delivered early, reducing what we call big risk, big bang kind of risk. So you as a business analyst in this case, you have to define and prioritize what you call the increments part of it. So which module delivers the value first and manage the requirements per increment. So you have to. A very good example is the enterprise system. I hope you have heard about this, which is the ERP, the enterprise ERP systems, which is quite common in most of the organizations. Instead of delivering the whole ERP at once, we normally have some increments. So you have increment one. Maybe you'll focus on core financials. You'll have increment two, HR and payroll. So here you're building a whole system, but you can be able to you can be able to deliver that system independently, each module independently. For example, here we have increment one, which is the core financials. So that system or that sections or that module can be able to operate or maybe generate financial reportings, things like balance sheets, P&Ls, things like what else do we have? Uh, Mostly, let's talk about the financial statements of financial statements of companies. Incrementals talk about the HRs and payrolls. Here, the HRs can be able to manage how they are paying employees, salaries, and everything. Talk about that system sections whereby you're having inventory of the company itself separately. You can be able to do some analysis about inventory without relying on increment one and increment two. So you'll see about that incremental kind of sections four. Then you have sales and distributions. So when we talk about incrementals, this is whereby you're having models which are operating independently, but you'll notice each one of them is developed independently, tested independently, and deployed independently. And you'll notice here that most of the risk is reduced because if each one of them can be able to operate independently, it means that there is a way that you guys are curbing the risk that are coming with the system, and you guys are able to know or notice the problem or maybe the risk in advance before before the end of it all. Yeah. So that is about the incremental model. Then there is prototyping. I hope you know prototyping is the best part of products or coming up with a system. Sometimes we use what we call wireframes sometimes. So we also use wireframes. So wireframes is also part of it. So quickly you build a working model which is focused. So you know what is a model. A model is a model mimics what you call real world problems or processes. For example, you can find that we Kenya, we have an economy system, so we can be able to build a model of Kenya. Like sometimes even before building, everything uses a model. Even uh, everything, any kind of system that we have in the world, any kind of system has a model. It was once built as a model. That's why you see before you build a house, you have to call in an architect. The architect is going to draw the house for you, both interior, backyard, the kitchen, the sitting room, how you want it to look like. That is a perfect example of a prototype. That is not the actual house. That is just a prototype of how your house is going to look like. So that is all about prototyping. So feel and interaction. So to clarify requirements and gather early user feedback. Prototypes can be throw away or evolve in the final product. Sometimes people use to they evolve that particular prototype that they have built into something massive, something big they can deploy to the market. Yeah. So you as a business analyst, you uses prototypes as what we call a elicitation tool, because I told you about elicitation. If someone asks you about eliciting, what is elicitation? Elicitation is about gathering informations. So you're gathering feedback. You build this particular model. You personally, you want to understand how best we can shape our today's economy. Maybe you have various variables or futures you want to work with, and uh, you want to incorporate that into the economical system of Kenya, maybe something like that. You want to see how spending habit is affecting the economy, how spending habit is affecting someone's savings and everything. So that is like you'll come up with a model which is incorporating that particular factors, those particular factors that you're trying to uh, incorporate or you want to investigate. So that is it. A very good example is a mobile banking app, which has an app user interface. So you notice that the team builds what we call a clickable kind of a prototype of the interface. So there is no real backend in that case, and you refine it through the user feedback rounds. So how people are, that's why you see I was talking about uh, the web, what we call the websites of various companies and various organizations or maybe e-commerce platform. So talk about the layout and navigations. How is the layout? How are people navigating? Are people finding hard? Is it complex kind of a website and so on? Talk about interactive with simulated kind of data, and then high fidelity refined user interface. I'm quite sure that in your line of work, you've come across this as you guys try to develop systems. Then we have another very amazing kind of model, which is called the spiral model. Yeah. So spiral is it's part of software development lifecycle. But you'll notice spiral normally combines what we call iterative development with what we call the risk management technique. So this one includes risks. If you know that you're dealing with a kind of a project, a system, or a product that has high risk, you have to use spiral. We'll see that. So this is a risk driven. So it is a risk driven iteration approach. So here your focus is the risk that comes with the project, the risk that comes with the system, the risk that comes with the product itself that you guys are trying to develop as a company. So here you're going to use the spiral model. So the project moves through what we call a repeated kind of cycles, what we call the spirals. That's why it's called a spiral. So each particular one assessing and reducing the risk before expanding the scope of the entire project or the system. So this one is very good if you're dealing with large, complex, high risk projects. Yeah. So that's when you're going to incorporate the spiral. So what is your role as a business analyst? You are centered on the risk. So that's why you're learning about the risk mitigation techniques. How can you be able to identify a risk? You mitigate it and to make sure that it does not carry up to the end of the project, because sometimes you can carry a risk up to the end and then it makes things hard for you guys to know. So you are centered at the risk. So business analysts contribute to what we call risk identification. So you identify the risk that comes with the project, then you assess that particular risk. I hope you know what is um, some of the risk mitigation planning in every. Sometimes you can talk about risk transference. There are those particular people who normally transfer the risk to a third party. Yeah. So we have those, we learn about them. We have a lot of them. We learn about those risks. An example is an AI image recognition software. So we'll notice that technical visibility is uncertain where the AI may not perform. So you'll notice that early spirals build small prototypes to test the core technology and attack the biggest risk first. So later spirals refine the algorithms of that particular model, because in this case you're using machine learning to identify the images. AI image recognition softwares, mostly we use what we call supervised learning. Supervised learning is where you're using a label kind of data to train your model so that it can give you the best output. For example, you can have a pool of images. You have labeled cats, dogs, elephants, rats, something like that. Then you train your model using that. That is a label data. That's why you call it a supervised learning. So you see how sometimes even machine learning is coming into software development and business analysis. So we have those things. So that is it about that. Image recognition software is an example of a spiral model in this case. So let's see inside the spiral. So we have seen that spiral is a kind of a risk-driven iteration kind of software development model that we can employ, especially when you're dealing with a large and complex risk-driven projects, or maybe product or a system. So what are some of the phases that we have in between or within the spiral? So it has four phases, so every cycle. So the first phase is planning. So here you're defining, you should have what you call a well-defined objectives that you want to achieve at the end of the day. Why are you building that system? Why are you building that model? Why are you building that kind of product to that organization? Then constraints and what you call alternatives for this particular cycle. So phase two is what we call the risk analysis, because we have talked about that Spiral is a risk-driven iteration kind of model. So it's focusing more on the risk. So here we need to do some a bit of risk analysis, whereby you need to identify, that is the best part of it, evaluate technical, that is all about assessment. So it's all about evaluation of the technical cost and what you call the schedule the risk. So this is the heart of the model. So you'll notice that most of the time you'll spend around risk analysis, yeah. Then talk about the development. So this will just come later after you're done with your risk analysis. Here you're going to design your product. Yeah, you design, you prototype, you can code or maybe test whether this phase requires. If that phase requires testing, you can be able to do that. Then do evaluations where stakeholders review the deliverables and decide on the next spiral. If maybe we can deploy now the product to the market or not. So that is a decision that will come from the stakeholders if they're interested with the final product or the final solutions that you guys have developed. So then here, then loop the repeats. So this one goes in cycle. So it repeats. So if the evaluation part is not successful, they will go back to planning. They will go back to this part. They will have to redefine the objectives. Maybe the objectives were not met. So they will have to sit down again and redefine the objectives and everything and the constraints. Then talk about the risk. You come again. So you see, these are spiral kind of phases. So each spiral builds on the last, expanding scope and reducing what we call the risk. Then it has what we call a staircase analogy, whereby each particular loop up the spiral staircase is a project phase. So before climbing to the next level, you check carefully for dangers or risk that might exist in that particular phase that you're working on. So loop by loop until you reach the top. So the until you guys finish the you finish the whole entire project or products. So, and then just to finish on Spiral, so why isn't Spiral always listed with the others? You'll find that most of the companies, they are not listing it with the others. One, you'll notice that the Spiral model is better understood as a meta model kind of. So it's more on risk management wrap around the other models rather than a self kind of contained software development cycle like Waterfall or Agile. So what makes this particular model more advanced and more important to most of the organizations? So this one is all about generality, whereby it does not prescribe how development happens in each particular phase. So the development step could itself run as waterfall, agile, or even uh, another spiral. So you notice that you can combine all of them. You find that uh, you are combining the waterfall, you're combining the agile. By then, most of the time, you find that you'll combine all of this at once at each particular stage. There are those sections that require you to use agile, there are those who require you to apply the spiral and so on. And then this one is risk focus. Other models address risk. You see, the other ones are addressing risk, but this one makes the risk analysis the central driver of the entire process. So the other ones, they are not uh, making the risk as the center of the process. So, but this one is risks focus. Then in terms of complexity, you'll notice that we talked about when we have large kind of complex project, you can be able to employ the spiral model. And then not always necessary. So reserved for large, complex, high risk projects where the cost of the failure is significant and in it it's called undetermined, and then simpler models often surface. So its DNA lives on iterative development and risk management are now baked into agile and modern delivery approach. So some companies can use it. Okay, some companies use it, yeah, but mostly you find most people using the agile uh, ones. So how do you choose the right model? So you as a developer or someone who is providing solutions to the company. So how do you choose the right model? Yes, before we proceed, Walter, are you okay? Are you there? You're following? Are you okay up to that point? Is there anything that you need us to clarify? You need me to clarify? You are understanding it, right? Okay, so how do you find the lesson? How do you find the class? How are you finding the teaching so far? Oh, okay, fine. That's what I wanted to hear. So I just want to give you this information because sometimes you might find yourself in the center of choosing the right model to use. I know you've been working, but I think by learning, now you can be able to focus on the right model as far as the software development life cycle is much concerned. So in this case, check some things. There are some parameters. We normally call them parameters. So you notice that uh, you can be able to choose waterfall if your project is small and it has what you call a fixed kind of scope. Then you'll notice that in terms of requirements, the requirements are stable, fully defined, and then risk handling. So it has a low tolerance for change. So that is another thing. And then in terms of feedback, it is linear. So feedback comes late. So it means that feedback comes at the end of the project. So if you're building something of the sort, you can consider using the waterfall. Then we have the agile. Remember, this is for large evolving products. So in terms of requirements, it emerge and change each particular sprint that you guys are working on. Then in terms of risk handling, manage through what you call iterations. Then it thrives on what we call constant feedback, because we talked about agility is all about flexibility, collaborations, and feedbacks that you get as you do the project itself. Then talk about the V model, so safety critical systems. Uh, Requirements, they're defined with what you call paired test plans. So there are some test activities that have been made around it. Talk about quality risk control via testing. And then you notice that the feedback, the verification at every stage. This one we talked about if you're working on a project that is focusing more on verification and validation. So you can be able to bring in. Talk about the incremental. So this one we talked about if you're dealing with the large systems or what we call phased rollouts. So requirements will notice that it is defined per module. increment, because these are what we call incremental models, and we saw that they can operate independently, and they are also developed, tested, and deployed independently. Then talk about small releases. If you're talking about you want to build some immediate MVPs, something that you can show to people very fast and everything, you can use the incremental part of it, feedback after each particular increment. So you see the feedback also differs. You can build a prototype. This one is best suited for user heavy, user interface heavy, and clear kind of requirements that you don't know. Then discovered through what you call prototypes. Then risk handling, reduce what you call wrong product risk. Sometimes building to avoid building the wrong kind of product within the organizations or for the stakeholders. Then rapid user feedback. So you see here the feedbacks are different. Linear thrives on constant feedback, verification at every stage, feedback after each particular increment, rapid user feedback, and then we have the loops. So talk about the spiral, which is the large high risk kind of project. So here the requirements are refined every particular cycle. You know that, and we have been able to see all the phases of a spiral, starting from planning, and then I think development, there is testing, and there is evaluation or something. Then talk about the feedback and iterations, iterative by the design that you're making. So in practice, teams blend what you call models, e.g., they can so agile delivery with incremental release and prototyping for key user interface component. So you see, you can combine agile with kind of incremental. So here you're using agile for the sake of collaborations, flexibility, and feedbacks, which you're getting a constant feedback as you guys develop the product. And at the same time, you're building what we call incremental release. So you're focusing on the incremental model part of it because you're focusing on immediate release of the MVPs that you're building. And in this case, also you're doing prototyping of the user interface components that you guys are building for, showcasing to the maybe to the it's called what to the stakeholders and so on and so on. So sometimes it goes around that, and you happen uh, you have to explain all that to the stakeholders so that they can be able to understand what you're doing. Yeah. So so let's look at some of the business analysis role that is the which is constant across every model. So you'll notice that all the models that you have learned, we have a role that you personally, the and it is a must. It's not a choice. It's a must as a business analyst. You have to do that. Even if you choose spiral, you choose waterfall, V-shaped, incremental prototyping, and so on and so on. So you have to do the following, like whatever the model, the business analyst core responsibilities remains. One is eliciting and documenting requirements. That's the correct, that's an obvious thing. You you will start by collecting the informations or maybe the needs of the stakeholders and everything, or the company needs to achieve, and so on and so on, so that you guys can build the right system, the right product, and so on and so on. Another thing is to validate with stakeholders. You confirm documented needs. Documented needs reflects the real needs of the company. So you validate with stakeholders. Sometimes they will have some books where they have stored the informations and everything. So this one you can validate it from the business requirements needs, business requirement document, because it just speaks about the needs of the business and what they need to achieve and the objectives, the needs and the objectives of the business. So you have to validate with what the stakeholders want. Then you have to create what you call a user stories. Using the agility translates needs into what we call teams working currency, which is that. So user stories are very important. So you need to learn about that. Then support what you call testing activities. For example, the acceptance criterion, the UAT support, the traceabilities using the RTM requirement traceability matrix. You have to, because you guys are build an interface, but you guys uh, you don't know if the customers are going to accept whatever you guys are building. So you have to support in that, and then ensure what you call business value. So the solutions must meet the business needs at the end of the day. You can't just build for the sake of fun and everything. You guys, whatever you guys are building must meet the business needs and the objectives uh, that the business has set into place. That is the main goal. Then you need to remember that model changes when and how you do your business analysis work. So never whatever you do it. So you have supposed to be ready. So you have put some tips. Be ready to describe the business analysis rule in at least 3 models. So if you can be asked about either of it, you need to communicate and explain about it, and so on and so on. So I think we can do about this, and then I think the other part of the presentation will finish maybe tomorrow, and not tomorrow, the other week in the next class. So let's talk about how do you do stakeholders identity analysis and how do you engage stakeholders. Uh, I think I'll have to stop there for today. We don't. I don't want to pump a lot of knowledge, not knowledge, a lot of content. Maybe there is no need of going through a lot and you get nothing. So at least I'll have to leave you today with that, so that you go and brainstorm. You try to understand it better, whatever we have covered so far as a class. So I'll leave at that point. So I'll send the class recording. So before next class, because whatever we are going to learn from the coming classes, you have to understand. That's why I made sure that you get some basics, because basics are very important. Basics are very important. So you need to understand all these, your responsibilities, your career that you're going to follow, some of the skills that you need to have, the frameworks that we have covered, like the BABOK and the Agile. We went further into business analysis techniques, like the SWOT, process mapping, the requirement workshops, the PESTLE analysis, the use cases, prototyping, the gap analysis, the user stories, the data analysis part of it. Now we got into one of the amazing parts of these topics, like the software development lifecycle. So we saw how it follows some cycles: requirements, design, develop, testing, deployment. So we went through these, some software development models like Waterfall, Agile, V model, the incremental, the prototyping, and then the spiral. And then we have seen some phases that are within the spiral, starting with the planning, the risk analysis, the development, and then the evaluation part of it. And then we saw some special things about the spiral, why they are not stated with the other ones. Then how do you choose the right model? How do you choose the right software development model to use in your coming up of the project, maybe the model, the systems, and everything that you're working on. And then some of your roles that cuts across all the models. Even if you choose waterfall, you use spiral, you use V, and so on. So these are your major roles that you need to showcase or to bring out, eliciting and document requirements. You need to validate with stakeholders. You need to create user stories using the Agile. Talk about the supporting the systems activities, ensuring business values, and so on and so on and so on. So in the next class, we're going to start with the stakeholders. So here we are going to focus more on stakeholders. How do you identify stakeholders? How do you analyze stakeholders? How do you engage stakeholders? So who stakeholders are and how to find them all, because you need to have that kind of skills. Some companies will give you that responsibilities to go and look for them, the stakeholders and so on. And at the same time, you'll be building your own brand. You'll be making some very good connections with big peoples and everyone. Then there is power stroke interest grid that you use to select to understand some stakeholders and so on, like prioritizing engagement effort and so on. Talk about engagement techniques and communication planning that you can use to keep these particular stakeholders posted and so on and so on. So that's what you're going to start from next week, from the next class. Tomorrow we won't have a class, so we'll meet next week. I will communicate in advance to tell you. Up to that point, do you have any other question? Do you have anything? Do you have anything burning from you? Maybe you want to ask, or maybe you want to know. Okay, but I hope you're enjoying the class, you're getting it well. I hope I'm not going very fast. Oh, okay, great. I just wanted to confirm that. If maybe, sometimes maybe the speed might be low. I might need to increase the speed a bit. Okay, fine. I'll be able to share with you what we have done today so that at least you can go through it in advance so that before we meet in the next class, you can be able to catch up. But even in the next class, I'll be able to do some recap so that we make sure that you don't forget anything along the way and you understand what we are training. So Walter, since you don't have any other question, I think we'll call it a night. You have a blessed night. We'll catch up next week. You have a good day tomorrow and enjoy the rest of the weekend.